Of course, that's our 2-year-long research and activity program in which we take a deep dive into designing products, places, and systems for all. A very warm welcome to the people watching at home, but also a very warm welcome to the people who are joining me here in the studio. Nice to see you. I cannot repeat it enough. After 1.5 years, only me and the camera. It's really nice to have actual, real, live people here. Well, on with the program. In the past episodes of Designing Cities for All, we zoomed in on the challenges we are facing on individual, institutional, and systemic inequity. And one of our guests highlighted that inclusion happens by design or not at all. We've seen that the dominant narrative of design and design thinking can often be rooted in systems of oppression and exclusion. How can we untangle these forms of exclusion and redesign a more equitable world grounded in values of inclusion, of trust, liberation, and of course also healing? That's what we research in these programs. Last week, we offered and explored different design examples and initiatives that embodied equitable opportunities. And Today we will uncover what design and designers can learn from intersectionality and what the exact definition... Oh, I hear some music now. And what the exact definition of intersectionality will be. We will talk about that later as well. Our guests are Lotte van Eyck, Sarah Nashvi, Ali Assad. These are in the studio, but first we will go to Jackie Shaw, who will join us through Zoom. Jackie, are you there? It's awfully quiet, I have to say. In the meantime, while we're trying to connect with Jackie, who I see in the background, which is very nice. Jackie, can you hear me? I have to think of a Barbara Streisand sound now. Papa, can you hear me? Jackie, can you hear me? I will introduce Jackie, and in the meantime, we'll try to solve the technical problems. Jackie Shaw is a strategic futurist and at Future Ancestor Services, Inc. She's also a design anthropologist, and I'm very happy that they are here with us. Let's check whether Jackie is able to hear me and to respond. Jackie, are you there?
I can hear you if you can hear me.
Yes, success.
Yeah.
You would think, good to talk to you, Jackie. You would think after 1.5 years having Zoom conversations, we should manage to do it. But in the end, we did. A very warm welcome to you, Jackie. You are a design anthropologist and a strategist. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. A strategic futurist at Future Ancestor Services, Inc. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so my practice really examines how design and designers interact and influence the world around us. My work at Future Ancestor Services, we're like a full service. We do consulting, we do strategic planning, we do education around anti-racism and climate justice. And so the way that I see design, and myself is still a designer, even though I'm not always making things, is through the influence of the ways that we think, the ways that we work with other people to build systems, strategies. And yeah, imagining that strategic foresight bit is just imagining more inclusive futures. And then what are the steps to get to those futures? What do we need to build? What relationships do we need to create together?
Yeah. And the concept of futures, being future ancestors, is for me, it was fairly new. And it uses the principle that we all are ancestors of generations to come. And that means that we all have to take responsibility in order to leave the earth of the world that we live in inhabitable for future generations. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, definitely. So the way and the lens through which we do our work at Future Ancestors is what we call ancestral accountability. So understanding ourselves in the space and place of time that we're in, that we have ancestors that have done work before us to bring us to this place, and then that we act as future ancestors in an accountable way for folks in the future as well.
For people that consider that to be very abstract because we don't know what the future will hold, and I can imagine that our parents, when they were young, couldn't imagine us talking to each other. You're in Canada, I'm in Amsterdam. They couldn't imagine us talking to each other like we do now. So how can you design futures, or how can you develop scenarios in order to prevent future generations from living in a ruin?
Yeah, I mean, it's really based in our work is based in understanding the relationships we have within one another, in the responsibilities that we have to the planet, the responsibilities we have to our community members, to our family. We are like a Black and Indigenous owned and youth operated organization. So really letting the leadership of those communities, as well as the other ones that we hold, so LGBTQ, queer communities, disabled communities as well. It is a bit abstract, but we can always hope and imagine better futures for one another, and understand what it means to build those together as well, right? We can't imagine just a world by ourselves.
No, and leadership is very important in that regard. We will talk about intersectionality today. There are loads of definitions, different definitions on what intersectionality actually means. Can you give us your definition of intersectionality, please?
Yeah, so for me, intersectionality comes from the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black feminist scholar in the legal field. She really coined the term. And what it means is it's kind of a framework through which we understand the difference of intersecting structures of power and oppression that folks experience through the world, and really bringing in a multiplicity way of understanding these systems of oppression. As you can see on this slide here, this comes out of scholarship as well called the Matrix of Domination, where we can see on top, I believe, these are the identities or the ways of being that folks have more privilege in, and that privilege is built through long histories and long legacies of the way that power has been distributed or taken. And then looking at the bottom half of this graphic here, we see more of the oppressed side, those who experience oppression in their identities. But what I also want folks to understand, because conversations around privilege and oppression can get really spicy, I guess, people can feel really defensive, is that these aren't, inherent personal attacks, or these aren't inherent personal values of folks, but rather just like how we exist in society, which again is that design anthropology part. How is society played into our identities, and how does that play into the worlds that we design with and for one another?
Yeah, and what's important is that you prepared an exercise for us all to join into, so the people at home and the people in the studio are invited to do that as well. But when talking about intersectionality, to make it very simple, is you cannot, for example, be a one-cause activist. So you can't be anti-racist and homophobic at the same time. Mm-hmm. The two causes are intertwined, interwoven almost. And every cause, if you fight for one cause, that means you have to take responsibility for other causes as well, even though it's not in your own nearby living environment, and it's not a problem that you're involved with. You should take responsibility. Yeah, mm-hmm. Do you agree with that concept?
Yeah, definitely. I think as one gets more familiar with the ideas of intersectionality, and again, looking at those legacies that have led us to the current world and the current systems that we live in, you understand more and more that the roots of these problems are intertwined, and those experiences cannot be pulled apart or segregated, especially when someone is living in experience that does hold intersectional privileges and oppressions. Again, bringing in that like systems thinking and the ways that designers use that.
Right. Time is moving on so quickly, and it's lovely to talk to you. Can we move on to the exercise that you've prepared for us?
Yeah,
What should we do?
absolutely. So I will walk you through this guided visualization. This is a visualization that I like to use to kind of introduce people to their own internal biases that they might have without us getting too into it. So I'll launch into it since our time is ticking. So if everyone in the studio and at home could close your eyes and take a minute to imagine yourself in a public park. Just for now, it's empty of people. It's a warm day. The trees are heavy and the leaves and the sun breaks through to make you feel warm. There is a slight breeze. You can feel it on your face. As you look forward, you see a path winding. It winds far into the distance. Around the path, there are flowers and grassy patches and large leafy trees. The only sound is of birds singing. As you hear the birds, as you feel the warmth of the sun and are refreshed by a breeze, you decide to follow the path in front of you. You begin to walk and you move along the path. You hear human voices in the distance. You look first to your right and then to your left. You notice a young child kicking a football. The child throws the ball into the air and catches it as it falls. You notice the ball fall hard into the child's hands. Two people are playing with the child and you smile and wave towards them, noticing the smiles on their faces. As you continue to walk around some large trees, you pass two people sitting on a bench. They laugh loudly, and you try to hear what they're saying. You move again along the path and see a couple walking towards you holding hands. They walk past you as you look at them. As you walk on, a number of men are sitting at the bench in the path, talking and laughing. You look at them one by one. As you walk on and you reach the end of the path in front of you, you see this building and you walk into this room. You sit on the chair that you feel underneath you. And you come back, you begin to slowly open your eyes and join our group whenever you're ready. So as people are coming back into our room and our virtual space, what this exercise does is, we understand and we build these mental models. So I have some debriefing questions around what we just experienced in our short little virtual walk through a park. So as you're walking through the park, when you saw the child, was this child female or male or perhaps a separate gender? When you saw the two people with the child, did you imagine them as the parents? The two people sitting on the bench, what did they look like? Were they white? Were they able-bodied? Were they perhaps of different sizes? The couple holding hands that were walking towards us, were they old? Were they young? Were they also able-bodied? Were they two women or two men or a couple of the same sex or gender? The group of men on the bench, were they young or were they old? Were they friendly or threatening? And then did anyone in your park wear jewelry or clothing or any other signifier that they were from a different culture? Did they perhaps use mobility aids or were they of a diverse age or diverse body sizes? So what this activity does, again, is kind of see how we internalize our biases that we've been given in the world to understand the difference in the breadth of our understanding, right? When we're looking at designing intersectionality or with intentional intersectionality, we're trying to best understand the wide breadth of experience. And this exercise really brings to us that critical self-reflection of, oh, what do I actually know? What do I actually imagine when I imagine designing for the future?
And very interesting. And when you talk about biases, I have to say that there's a negative connotation with when you mention biases. Is that always a negative thing? Because biases are also connected to our own environment and to the things that we know. What is your perception of biases?
I think bias as a term can be seen as something that's neutral, right? Not positive or not negative, but rather something we just need to be aware of. And to be really intentionally cognizant of when we're working with it. When we give something a negative connotation, we're definitely less likely to want to bring that up in conversation, to want to share those ideas with other people. But in order to build a more intersectional way of practicing, we need to really get comfortable with those uncomfortable conversations and broaden our kind of critical understanding of what world view we have and what position we have.
Right. Okay. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I hope to return to you later. So don't go anywhere. But first, I would like to invite our three other guests here at the table, so I can introduce them. But thank you so much for now.
Thank you.
Please, everybody, if you can join us, I can introduce everybody. Our first guest is Lotte van Eyck, fashion model and the founder of House of Levi. A very warm welcome.
Thank you.
House of Levi, what is that?
That's my own fashion brand.
And what's your biggest goal with the brand? What would you like to achieve?
I would like to achieve a home for a lot of different people who feel like they don't belong to whatever space that is originally given to us by a racist system that keeps us in a box. And what I really want to achieve with House of Levi is a platform for creators that I can give visibility through the brand, because now I'm designing myself, but I would love to have people who are part of marginalized groups or live with a lot of stigma and a lot of non-help in our society, to have a platform and a stage that I can give them to show their talents and their creativity, and to just involve the entire community into creating and showcasing a lot of different people, because I made this brand, but I would love to have everyone be part of this brand, and to not keep it to myself, because fuck capitalism, you know. And I created this, but I want everyone to be able to make money off of this, or to just showcase themselves and their talents and what they're capable of, so that they can be seen by others and they can, forward their beliefs and their love and warmth and healing powers. So, yeah.
Right. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
And a more than deserved applause here. At the same time, in the previous episode of this program, we talked about being exclusive or sometimes excluding people in order to create inclusion. Every goal that you have or every group that you highlight means that another group cannot be highlighted. What is your position in that sense in regard to excluding people in order to make a more inclusive society?
Damn, that's a very good question, actually. Well, now I'm talking about it. I have zero white cis-abled men in my team or in the photo shoot or in whatever I do. Those are really the people that I'm excluding. And yeah, I have like non-binary, finery, trans people, people of color, people from different backgrounds, different ages. So I'm actually really trying to exclude white supremacy in everything I do. And I try to keep the white, cis-abled heterosexual people out of it. Actually, yeah, that's the group that I'm excluding from everything.
And why is that?
Because I think that they have enough podia, they have enough attention, they have enough, they have always been the ones who get every job, get every position, get all the opportunities, you know. And I'm like, we need to, and I am white, cis, abled, and I need to make that path for the people who did not get the same opportunities as I get and who have not the privilege that I have. So I feel like that the white, cis, abled people can, you know, do their own thing, and I will help everyone who is not that to go wherever they want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate because that's my job and it's not my opinion. But if I would turn the tables, I would say, who said that they need your help?
No one's saying that. That's just what I want. Like, I want to, I've been fed my whole life, and I know what it's like to be part of a group that's just ignored and being shamed for whoever you are. Well, this is just who I am, and I just want to live, you know, I just want to exist. That's all I want. So I'm like, and doing this work, I got more aware of other groups and intersectionality, and not like my fatness absorbed my entire life, as in like that was the baddest thing there was in my life, because it was my problem and it affected me. And then I started looking around myself, and I was like, I'm not the only one who feels like they don't belong here, who feels like they're excluded from everything, you know? There are people who are excluded from much more things than I am. So I was like, if I'm gonna do something, I'm not gonna do it only for myself, because what's that? Enough people are doing that, you know? So it's not that anyone needs my help, but I'm just here to make a haven for anyone who wants that and who needs like a step up to anything.
And the experience that you have is that one negative thing in your life isn't the thing that really defines who you are, defines your identity, and you have to go beyond that.
Yeah.
If we talk about design, can you tell us a little bit about the process that you use and how intersectionality is a part of it?
Yeah, so I have my own clothing brand right now, and I really wanted to create this because I cannot go into a shop here in Amsterdam and just buy anything. Like, everything I'm wearing right now is online and my own clothing brand, but you can't see that. I'm just... Oh!
Yeah. Oh.
I'm still just, you know.
Oh, look at that.
Just
look
showing.
at that. Yeah.
Now they can think that I'm not wearing any. But I have to go, you know, to online shops to buy anything. So I have to like plan ahead of, oh, I need a dress by Friday, so I need to order it on Monday, blah, blah. And I was like, that's just bullshit. You know, since I was 4 years old, my grandma and my mother had to alter clothing for me to be able to fit it. So since I was young, I wanted to make clothing for fat kids, basically. And then I got older, and then, you know, your plans change, and now I got back to that. And I was like, I don't want to exclude anyone, so my size range will just be extra, extra small to 10 extra large, you know, because I want everyone to be able to come to the same shop and buy whatever they want. And now I started with very tight fitted clothing, very showing clothing. And now we're going to the winter collection. And I want it to be that there are also pieces that cover your body more, because there are also groups of people who do not want to show anything and just want to dress in another way. So in that case, I am like, in my first collection now is very naked, because that's what I wanted. I was like, I'm fat and I want to be naked, you know, I want to show my body and I don't want to hide myself. But now, like, coming back to intersectionality, I'm like, no, but there are also people, you know, who want to wear prints but do not want to show their arms or their stomach or whatever.
Who are the designers?
I am the designer right now.
You design everything?
Yeah, I do everything myself. Yeah, together with Josine. She's called The Bigger Block on Instagram, and fashion is her work. So she got the hand of it that I wanted to create my own clothing brand. And she was like, well, I will help you because I think this is very necessary. So yeah, and now we're here.
Great. We will return to you later, but I would like to introduce our second guest. Sarah Nashvi is a contemporary artist and artist in residence at the Ateliers. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Like I said, you're currently an artist in residence at Ateliers. What are you working on at the moment?
That.
Tell me what that is.
This is somewhat like a culmination of the time I've spent at Ateliers, and I think one of the most important things that it entails is a shared experience that a lot of artists of color have shared in that space. So it is a critique of the white institution, because I was part of the white institution, and I felt like it was necessary for me to leave this behind. in a way like an archive that I think we can all refer to, especially people who come to this institution in the future and look at this history of participants. Because I think when I first joined Ateliers, I looked at who was the last South Asian person that was part of this institution, and I think it was in 92, which was quite shocking. But I also knew that it was a historically very white institution.
And I've got two questions in regard to that. What is the reason, do you think, that the last South Asian person wasn't part of it in the recent history? Why?
I think there are many reasons, because it obviously doesn't just have to do with the white institution, but also about accessibility within India and its context, because I don't think art in itself is a profession that everyone has access to. It's extremely exclusive, and there's a lot of gatekeeping. So for me to also be able to choose this as a profession means that I had safety nets and that my parents were stable enough that I could opt for this. That being said, there is also a lack of awareness that I think the West has, because I think you are introduced to art in a different manner. Like, you see it as a very viable option, but because of the instability back home, economically and otherwise, it's not really that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you talk about the critique that you have on a white institution, what is that critique?
So I think that there's a lot covered in this work, but maybe I can talk about how there is a very stark hierarchy, and they do claim to be very inclusive, and they do choose to take in participants from different ethnicities and different cultures, and yet the institution remains white, because structurally it still functions on this hegemony, and it has very extremely supremacist values, because it does not even have a kitchen space where people can share food and eat and cook together, which is something that is very fundamental to a lot of non-white cultures. Apart from that, also the kind of money that comes in, we don't really, we're not, it's not very transparent. We're not given access to who contributes to this institution. And while within the institution, we could be having discourses about race and gender and politics, but if the money the money is blood money, then it's not really doing any good. Yeah.
And how does the critique resonate within within the ateliers and within the institution itself?
I think it's been quite a rough time, because not just me, but my entire year has been fighting consistently. We've been having meetings with the institution, and like I said, because it's a primarily white administration, a lot of the work, the labor that we put in, does not really get recognized. We've also heard that we're just a bunch of not grateful, essentially, because we've been offered a space and we've been given a place to stay, and we have a stipend. But again, this idea of gratefulness is quite toxic, because if I am entering a space and I am going to practice as an artist, you are gaining a lot more from me than me from you.
Yeah.
I mean, it is at the end of the day transactional. So.
And that the experience that you have isn't being shared in the institution,
Yeah.
and that's why the institution can gain much more than you can gain from the institution.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's quite frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think also, whatever my practice is, it directly becomes, in a way, a reflection of that institution. So if my practice is very political, it makes the institution look like they're very political, but in reality, they do not actually take up on that role. So I will be fighting on the streets, but they're not beside me.
Why are you still there?
I am still there because I don't have an option. Yeah.
That's quite sad.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not that bad. It's okay.
Well, in that sense, I mean, if we talk about systems if we aim for a systemic transformation, it's very difficult to be still part of the system,
Yeah,
and
it
then
is,
you
yeah.
keep it intact.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that if you leave, you won't keep the system intact,
Yeah.
but it's the question of what as an activist, what role do you play within the system, and how can you sometimes disrupt the system?
Yeah.
Is it your aim to disrupt the system, or?
I think dismantling the system is something that I stand for, because I don't really believe in having conversations with people who have enabled the system for so long, because I don't believe that they're the people that we should give power to make the change. I think we need to break it down so that it
From
can
within.
rebuild. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and break it down from within and rebuild
Yeah,
it from
yeah.
there. We've got a clip of your work. That's the How Does One Say Queen in Islam? Let's have a short look at the clip, and then we'll talk about it later.
Cool.
Yeah, I can see, or am I correct in seeing that your work plays a lot with iconography and
Yeah.
what that means? Can you explain why you decided to do that?
I think for this particular project, my goal was, in a way, to reclaim my own roots. That being said, it was also a lot about just working with friends and family because it was a film that I made with one of my best friends, Sophie Subramaniam, and also another artist who I really, really admire, Hibbo, who did the sound piece for it. So this collaboration in itself says a lot about the film I was making because, like I said, it's about reclamation of roots. I really wanted to work with narratives in Islamic history that I didn't come across as a child. So the whole film is essentially set in a dream landscape where there's this image of a tree, and then there's a mask on it, which is my grandmother, and I am sat underneath it wearing another mask, which is essentially me. And then I drift into sleep, and there are all of these characters coming to life, and it's mostly from like the point of view of a child who is imagining all of these characters come to life, and also see them performing these really strong gestures and dancing and frolicking, essentially.
Is there a connection with an intersectional view on the world of it, or an intersectional research within your own roots?
Yeah, because I think the way I was raised, and I also was raised in a Muslim household, I think it's quite integral that the history that we are taught is not the one that has been erased. And as a young child, if you are being raised with these ideas, like, for example, if you're being taught about the Prophet, and if they are the center of the religious cosmos, you're also slowly erasing yourself because you're not seeing representation of yourself in these stories that you really look up to. And I think this film, essentially, for me, was trying to mend some damage that was done. And also because there's such rampant Islamophobia, not only just all around the world, but also in India, because it's now a very authoritarian system, and there's a lot of hate and just bad sentiment towards Muslims and other minority groups.
Right.
So this was necessary in a way.
In reaction to that?
Yeah, I would say.
We will turn to you later as well. And for our third guest, a warm welcome to you, Ali Assad. Welcome. You, of course, are an architect, you're a curator and a researcher at Curatorial Research Collective. A very warm welcome to you. We discussed different forms of exclusion in the fashion industry and in art. And we talked in previous programs as well about how architecture can be very inclusive because it's modeled towards cis, male, white, Western European men. Why is that a bad thing?
Why is it a bad thing? I think it's not necessarily about it being bad or good, more so about the fact that we tend to assume that it's a universal mandate of architecture to assume this idealization of the human form, and that idealization happens to be predominantly white, male. But this kind of sphere of intelligibility inframes us. It is effectively the buildings that we live most of our lives, and it's the built environment that we navigate.
What are the alternatives? Because what should you aim for in order to have an ideal form of architecture?
I think it's a greater understanding of differentiation, the fact that we all are different.
And how much would that affect, like, the room that we're in right now or the homes that we live in?
I think we'd be surprised about that because some artists, some designers, some architects have explored the extents to which those possibilities are made, and the potentials that lie within them. But the reality is that architecture continues to be based around these universal measures.
And is it because if you look for universality, are there universal values or worths that could be included in every building?
Of course there are. I mean, this is an upcoming project of ours at Dutch Design Week, where we're exploring this very notion. So effectively, if you look at this kind of charts out kind of these three major milestones in a history of how architecture space is effectively schematically drawn. These form the diagrammatic bases of how design is established, how space is created. People still invoke Vitruvian measures that are very Eurocentric, very male-dominated, and although these drawings, these measurements are established, I mean, more than 500 years ago, yes, they do resonate with both female and male bodies in the contemporary age, but we shouldn't see them as universal. Ultimately, what we were trying to do within this exhibition, and I hope you'll all come and see it, a shameless plug.
Building bodies?
Building bodies at Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven, in the Klokgebouw. Is to really explore how these measures derived from this kind of system of beliefs that first came from the sacred and the profane, from geometric shapes, slowly started to kind of really manifest in a very structured rationalization that effectively is catered to one body.
Well, I understand that those universal values, which aren't universal, are being used. But if you look into the future, if you have to paint the scenarios that you said have already been researched, what is that future? Different kinds of homes for different kinds of shapes or different kinds of
Very
people?
much so. Different types of programs. I believe. I mean, I'm not the first person to say this. There's a certain lack of freedom that is given.
But can you be more specific?
Sure.
How specific can we get?
Sure.
If you would imagine the ideal architecture, the ideal building, what would it actually look like if we go through this threshold?
I think the problem is to work with ideals. That is the major problem.
Why?
Because nothing is ideal.
Well, for you, is it because if I imagine my ideal home, it's ideal on an individual level. So I'm researching into your individual level
I mean,
what your
let me
ideal will
put
be.
it this way. To quote the great Audre Lorde, and to really kind of start this conversation maybe about intersectionality again. There's no such thing as single issues because we don't live single issue lives.
Yeah.
And the reality is there isn't kind of a measure for one size fits all because we aren't all the same size. We are not all able-bodied. We're not all male, female, or anything between. The reality is that there are architects, there are designers that try to reestablish these measures, not necessarily through gender, not through their anatomical
I know about that,
framing.
and I know, but I'm going to move away from the abstract
into the actual
and
physical.
exactly. And I know that it's not a measure for everybody, but
Sure.
If we go into the practical idea of it, I would like for you to paint us that picture. What that means for you.
I think it means a space where none of us feel, including my fellow speakers here, none of us feel the way that we have been made to feel.
And how can we feel if we go into your ideal building? How do we feel?
Potentially unothered.
And how do we see that? How do we perceive? How do you achieve that?
I think I would not know how to answer that as someone who has been othered their whole life.
Well, but that's quite a tragic thing because what we said with Lotte, that negative part of your life doesn't identify you solely. to not, and I'm sure I don't have the answer either, but to not have the answer because the solution haven't been offered to us because we've been othered is quite sad. In a way.
It is. I think I also speak from a certain privilege as a researcher and an aspiring historian, more so than an activist or as someone who is propelling change into the world. I think the position that we take both in the CRC and the position that I take with my own work and how I problematize and polemicize the world is to really ask questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're difficult questions. They're questions that most people are not easily confronted with because there are no real solutions, not at hand. And the reality is, yes, architecture might look exactly the same.
I would like to know your positions on that as well, because what strikes me at the projects that you do is not only you raise the question about the lack of intersectionality, but at the same time you move on into putting it into practice, you in your work, in your brand as well. How important is it to show alternative, to offer alternatives to people? Lotte, what do you think about that?
In my niche or
In every field.
That it's important, yeah, because we're not all the same, and it's not all in individual level. For instance, if I think about architecture, if I think about furniture, if I think about rooms, the first thing that pops in my mind that how do you say that in English? A terrasje? A terrace.
Yeah.
The most easiest words I forget. On a terrace, like if I come on a terrace and I see like these small tables, small chairs, all like tied into each other, that's my worst nightmare because I'm like an elephant in that space. You know? Or if I come to an event and I see chairs like this, I'm like, oh my God, do I have to sit on that for 4 hours, you know? So things like that, or for me, I'm excluded from whatever is going on because I do not fit in the chairs. If I come to a doctor appointment and like the handles are in my thighs, I'm like, so I'm too big for you. I'm too big to be here, you know? So that was the first thing that popped into my mind, like give alternatives. Also with like roller coasters, I do not fit in every roller coaster. And I'm like, why don't we fucking make 2 seats or 4 that are bigger so that also fat people can ride, you know, just from my point of view. So
the standardization is the biggest problem that you address as well. But again, do we need to, if you think about strategies in order to create more inclusive design, what should we do? Do we need to wait for other people in order to realize that that there's no equity? No, everybody disagrees with that.
Sure.
What should we do?
just try, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
I think it's not necessarily about dismantling the system, as Sarah has mentioned, but more about reconfiguring it. I think we have more agency in potentially impacting that change.
Yeah.
I believe these systems kind of intrinsically carry. I mean, you try to establish this kind of image of this institution, and what you've done is that cachet that it generates is something that you're turning against it. So you've actually taken everything that belongs within that institution to flip it on its head.
Okay, I will pose another question, just to be devil's advocate. You're too sweet. You are all actually too sweet, because it's time for a revolution, and you're all playing along, you're all playing nice.
No.
You're not playing nice?
Not close.
No.
Please, because again, devil's advocate. Tell me. You okay? I'm going to continue devil's advocate thing. You still stay there. Just move it and try to change it from, try to look for the anarchy and to disrupt everything, to break everything down.
Mm-hmm. I still do, but I also, just to add to what both of y'all said, I think in just as being practitioners who try and strive for social change, you can't really be creating from a singular experience as a reference. And I think that's what we're all trying to do in a way. In each, even if it requires us to take on roles of fighting a system. And that's why I said dismantling, because the current system that I am familiar with is so outdated that I don't see it as an option to work within it.
But you already do work within it.
Yeah,
actually.
but the issue is that structurally and also in terms of funding, we don't have that much power. So we are essentially in a position of not having any power trying to fight a system. And that's why I say, we need to burn it down. Again, that being said,
But you're not burning
I'm
it down.
saying I'm trying to burn it down, but I can't. I don't have the tools yet. But again, I need to examine what do I have that I can do within my resource to change that, and that's I'm doing everything I can
And to create awareness
yeah,
there as
and
well.
I think whatever you do have in your power, you need to use it to its fullest. Because obviously, I'm gonna say I'm gonna burn buildings down, but I can't. But I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna be relentless about it.
Yeah. I want to go back to Jackie. Jackie, are you still there? You've been listening in on a conversation. What's your impression of it? Because we've mentioned that systems aren't functioning as they should be, that they're very exclusive, and intersectionality doesn't play a part yet. And everybody tries their best in order to change that. Ali does that through research and to addressing certain issues as well, and to creating exhibitions in order to address the question that he researches. Lotte is creating a brand where she offers actual alternatives and doesn't play along with the usual forms. Sarah is creating within the system of the ateliers artworks that actually criticize the ateliers as well. What do you think of that? Is that enough?
I mean, what Sarah is saying as well, I agree that we only have so much power within our own individual worlds, right? As the previous sessions have said, there's these different levels of which power exists. There's the individual level, the institutional level, and then the systemic level. And the systemic level is so deeply rooted, like it's rooted in the myths that we tell ourselves. It's rooted in like the culture. And it's really hard as individuals to do that. And it happens really slowly, right? The systems that we live in have been built up over currently like 500 years of colonialism in the West, of imperialism, of white supremacy. So we're not going to see this change in our lifetime. But what we do get to see is people like ourselves around this table living lives and pushing for lives that are and have previously been seen as untenable, right? As a queer person, I get to live in this world where, even 20 years ago, my life would have looked very different. As a mixed race person, like I get to exist in a world where that's no longer as big of an issue. So we're seeing the change happen. And it's really, both an individual act of what we can do in our lives to kind of resist the systems that try to mold us into things that we literally cannot be because this is how we live, and also break those systems wide open in collective ways, in showing people that like, hey, it's actually like I'm a fat person too. It's actually okay to be fat. It's actually a beautiful life filled with love and joy. And it's just the world that has been designed around, as Ali said, the one idealized person that makes it hard.
Yeah, we know that, but and you can tell yourself that it's amazing that you are the way that you are. But until people realize that it really actually is amazing that you are the way that you are, things aren't changing. And I'm looking for that sweet spot that we have to enter, that we can change that around. How do we do that?
I mean, I'm going to come back at you playing devil's advocate and say, we're currently in a program and we're currently talking with folks whose power has come from that lived experience, right? Whose understanding of the world and why we need to break it open has begun by seeing as designers, we're so tuned into problems and solutions, and we can begin to work from our own lived experience and start to connect with people, right? I'm in Canada, I'm totally elsewhere, but I'm relating to folks in Amsterdam talking about, the power and the systems that they want to break down. So how do we continue to build those connections? And how do we continue to deepen that power collectively within ourselves.
Yeah. Are you using my own game against me, Jackie? How can you do that? Disrupting the system. No, I'm very happy that you actually do. Ali, you had a very strong reaction when Jackie said we won't witness the change within our lifetime. Why was it so strong for you?
I regretted that a moment. I mean, as she said, as they said, it is change that is happening within our lifetime, and it has happened over the course of the last couple of decades. The reality is that if we continue to float on the idea that it won't happen within our time, then we're actually not giving ourselves as much agency as we deserve. Because I do believe that the conversation is moving forward.
Yeah.
It has moved so far forward that in some ways the world has moved 10 steps back. There's been such pushback, there's such a rise of populism, there's such a rise of right-wing movements across the world, across Europe, across the United States. I mean, do I need to mention the Dorito? I mean, that did happen for a while.
Yeah.
And the reality is that those signs of that pushback has happened because that change is eminently moving forward. And I appreciate that you're playing devil's advocate, but really I believe that the agency of the singular within the collective is paramount.
Well, yes and no, because the singular cannot move on its own because by themselves, and that's the thing that Jackie said as well. I think that in connecting networks globally is gaining traction and power, and then you can reach a tipping point where you can actually change the system or disrupt the system or adapt the system, and we should move away from that as well. Another question for you, Ali, because Jackie showed us a model in the beginning where all different... Jackie, can you explain what the model was with all the different definitions of individuals almost? But that's my explanation.
So this model is called the matrix of domination or the matrix of oppression. It comes out again from Black feminist theory, and this is from Patricia Hill Collins. And it's a sociological model that allows us to kind of understand the different dynamics of power. I mean, I have my own critiques of it in the way that it's laid out. It's very binarist. And again, we miss, we kind of miss that nuance. But again, it's kind of just like a first step visualization of seeing, how the axes of power interact with one another.
And there's another model that was shown as well. Can you explain us what we see there?
Yeah, so this model that I have here, this is what I developed in my research, and it's definitely a living, breathing kind of constantly working on it and thinking about it, but turning kind of the traditional design thinking model of iteration and movement to understand how to imbue intentional intersectionality in your work. So looking at ways such as showing up to answer the call of a problem, to learning about that problem, be that through secondary research or through lived experience or through working with communities, contextualizing that problem. So understanding it not just as a singular, this is what we're trying to solve, but what are all the other moving parts that feed into that? Constantly questioning as well. Are we on the right track? Are we asking the right questions? Applying what we've learned through the model so far and then evaluating how that worked. And it continues and it's cyclical in it. I also see it as kind of zooming in and out of itself, right? And each of these smaller circles that go around, we can have a whole set of this model in that smaller circle.
Right. If we look at architecture, is this a model? Are those two models systems that could be used in order to make it more equitable, in order to make it more intersectional as well?
Very much so. I think if you think about the way not necessarily individual practitioners, but let's look at architecture as a discourse. Let's look at the way architectural planning manifests in urban space. A lot of these issues are not addressed because they don't necessarily use diagrams like these. And inherently, what becomes obvious in the way I think profiling occurs in public space, the way gender mainstreaming does, ableism does, is that these inherent problems are not necessarily purely physical. They don't necessarily stem from a series of design principles that are purely stemming from this kind of standardization that I spoke about, but really stem from societal issues. And that's what architecture is. I mean, you introduced me as an architect, but I'm a non-practicing architect. I'm an architect who chose to abandon the discourse and instead engineer paradigms within which to infiltrate architecture and to kind of, I don't know, shed a light on how unwilling and maybe at times unable it is to confront how passive it's been about these problems. And so applying this kind of model it would be fantastic.
But if you raise the question, whose responsibility is it to answer those questions or to resolve the problems that arose?
Well, this is something that within the CRC we try to look at because we appreciate this is our own backyard. We are a very diverse group. We come from very different backgrounds, but we're all inherently looking at architecture culture and its broader societal frameworks. And we set up a series of talks called Open for Discussion, where we try to explore this and these kind of inequities within our world. And breaking it down into like three fragments, into like three spheres, really it stems from education. Architectural education, which really there's an consistent and persistent problem of diversity and representation in. Architectural practice, which inherently favors certain types and lives and certain abilities.
But again, whose responsibility is it to...
Every architect who is ready to take it on.
Who's ready to take it on? That limits it to a very small group of people.
I think you would be surprised.
All
If
right.
we could just go to the next slide.
Yeah.
The series there were 8 talks. I would really recommend you see them. They're really fantastic. And I obviously couldn't take 8-hour-long conversations and kind of put them into one slide, but these are a few sound bites that really effectively show how much agency individual practitioners and people acting within collectives and within these broader networks really have. I mean, I'm not going to really read them out, but then you really see how architecture is designed. Architectural education is designed to hide me, hide my body, hide my presence, hide my contribution. And you see so many of these practitioners actively engaging in practices and research. I mean, fundamentally, research is still an action.
It is.
It is
But we don't have
to
this-
untype that, to untype how these structures and these canons are formed, because these
But my
canons are
worry
not
is-
set in stone.
But my worry is that we keep being stuck in research, keeping stuck in conversations, and not moving into action. And that's the thing that's why I'm pressing that point
Sure.
so much. You've seen the diagrams. Art, of course, is autonomous, works on itself. But is it possible to see those diagrams and have any relation or connection to artwork?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is very important, and I think we also, I guess, touched upon it, is the urgency that we take upon when we actually interact with these issues. The more the urgency, I think, the more people will take up on the causes. Like I said, I mean, like you also said, we need a lot of people to really take up on this, because even though as we're practicing as individuals, collectively put together, that creates a lot of change. And as an artist, I think one of the ways in which I can actually see this change come through in my lifetime is to also understand how much art can do in terms of changing the course of politics, and to really, because I think it's already happening. I think there are many countries that have also co-opted a lot of these subjects and also taken upon art to use it for propaganda. And I think to combat that, we need to see the power that your own medium has, and try to work within that framework and try to break it from within again. I think for me, one of the best examples was in 2019, end of 2019, there were these nationwide protests in India against 2 very discriminatory laws that came out. And there were a lot of young artists, designers that started creating these visuals that fit into the regular WhatsApp forwards that you would get. And instead of having the propaganda that the government usually spreads, they had revolutionary text on it and things like that. And I think it's really important that our generation can see that they have this tool to use for themselves and not just authoritarian governments.
Right.
Yeah.
Time's running out, unfortunately. I could continue talking to you for hours. The final words, I would like to give the opportunity to Jackie. If we move on here, are there any best practices you could refer to that we can apply here in the Netherlands in order to have more equity, to create intersectionality or an awareness of intersectionality in the design practice?
I think, when I do my work with future ancestors and these questions come up, we really always start from a space of critical self-reflection. So really understanding the 2 principles of your own positionality, really being strong and forward about the values and the experiences that you're bringing to the table, in order to model that with other folks so that you understand the diversity around your table. And then with that, understanding the worldviews that come with those positionalities. So that, I like to say that we live in a world that is actually made up of 6 billion different worlds. So how do we collaborate between worlds?
Yeah. And how do we take those words in account? And how can you address that? Well, thanks again. Thank you so much. Thank you for your stories, for your examples and the insights in your work. And thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully we'll continue this conversation in future as well. So can I have a round of applause for our guests, please? Like I said, time has moved too quickly, so we have to close off. Our next program will be on the 25th of October, and that's a collaboration between the Designing Cities for All and the Center of Expertise for Creative Innovation, and that deals with the real worth of art. Next up on November the 15th is the first episode of A Triptych, and that's about inclusive technology with our fellow Designing Cities for All fellow, Galit Ariel. If you're a student or a designer to be, please join our book club, because you will get a copy of Glitch Feminism, and that's selected by Galit Ariel, our fellow, of course. The deadline to apply for that is this October the 20th. And if you go to dezwijger.nl/DCFA, you can find more information. And finally, if you'd like to make a financial contribution to our programs, that is possible, because if you go to dezwijger.nl/pay, you can leave a financial donation that will benefit the programs directly. It's been a pleasure hosting this program here from De Zwijger, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye-bye.